Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be doing something new, something that I've never done before, and that is creating a biotope or African inspired biotope slash blackwater hybrid. Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a mishmash because I'm sure it's not technically a proper biotope, because there's going to be some materials used which aren't from Africa, and it's not going to be a true blackwater because to be a true blackwater I think the pH has to be below a certain level, so forgive me, it's just inspired by. But as you can see, I've just put in a base layer of aqua soil. That was just some recycled soil from an old scape, capped it with sand, and I've just put in 2 pieces of elderly stone, or Frodo stone as it's sometimes known, just as a base, just to support this piece of gnarled manzanita wood. Now this was a piece of wood from my old 60cm scape which I took down in place of the new 90p, so that's why it's kind of got this really dark colour. Normally manzanita wood's quite a bit brighter and it sometimes has like reddy tones in it, but obviously as it stays underwater longer it kind of gets a little bit more darker. However, I am going to have to glue this down because I still think it's going to float. So yeah, I was just kind of creating a layout. I think one of the issues, like especially in hindsight and also subconsciously at the time, was that I was trying to create a biotope, but in actual fact I was scaping it, and I feel like biotopes are kind of less scaped and a little bit more random, and that wasn't something that kind of came easy because I'm just so used to like scaping and I guess following to an extent some sort of scaping rules. So it's kind of like a weird end result, not necessarily in a bad way, but because it does look more aquascaped than sort of natural and random. But that's why I kind of called it hybrid, because I did want something that still looked, you know, kind of eye-catching, and I think these pieces of gnarled wood definitely do. It does create this kind of nice I don't know, I guess it could be like a root system in the water, it could be like a clump of branches that sort of like plants and things get entangled around. So yeah, it was just kind of inspired by the natural habitat of the fish that are going to go in it, in terms of sort of like plants, and sort of where they're found. So yeah, I think that was the trickiest part, but the next bit, as I said, was to glue everything in place because I still think this will definitely float, and the method for gluing is just a piece of like cotton, like a makeup pad remover type thing, wedge that in the gap that makes the contact and just drown it in super glue, basically just some cyanoacrylate super glue, and just leave it a few minutes and it will just set solid. I usually cover some of the obvious points with some sand just to kind of make that join a little bit more seamless, because otherwise you are left with like a white lump, but you can cover that with plants. Next I'm going to go in with some new sand. So I found this sand in Horizon Aquatics. So this is like some rare ADA gravels. Don't get me wrong, you don't have to use these because they are quite expensive, but they were new and rare, and I was like, oh. So I did buy a few packs. So the first one we're going in with is some very small Congo sand, and I feel like this matches the Frodo or elderly, whatever you want to call it. I feel like every manufacturer or brand calls it a different name, but I feel like it blended in really well because it's got like the dark flecks in it. So I went in with some of that and then just kind of blended it into the sand. It does get a little bit darker underwater as well, but it was just a really nice small grain. It's smaller than your usual aqua gravel, which is this one. However, I did still use some of this because I do really love this ADA gravel, and this isn't too badly priced, I don't think, either, for especially an ADA product, which are renowned for being sort of premium and expensive. But the gravel's actually not too bad, and it really is a nice gravel. It's definitely one of the nicest gravels that I've ever used. It's got lots of like lovely natural colours in it, and again it just seems to blend in with most stones really well. So I put some of that in, and then I think lastly was the Mekong sand or Mekong sand, and this is, I think the closest way I could explain it is it's kind of got the warm tone of Colorado sand, but it's got darker flecks through it, and I just thought this looked perfect for sort of like a riverbed type sand, like a biotope type sand, because just the colour of it, and like I say, just the flecks through it. And I'm thinking of adding some of this into my big 90p Aquascape as well, because I think it's my new favourite sand. And that just kind of tied everything in and blended everything together really well. So I just went ahead and added that in just where I thought it needed it, mostly in the foreground. The background you're not going to see too much because there's going to be plants and things, but I just think it makes this really, really natural looking transition. And like I say, it blends really well with the rocks. At this point, something was definitely missing from the front, and I'm still not happy with this, but I did add 2 sort of smaller manzanita twigs. They do look a little bit weird because they're a different colour. As I mentioned earlier, these have been, the main branches have been underwater, so they're dark. These are new, so this is sort of like the natural colour, so it does look a bit odd. I like the direction in which that they're going, but they're just too thin. They don't look right, so at some point I will add a thicker sort of branch in the foreground. But that meant rooting through the shed, and it was dark and icy. It's been awful in the UK, I'm sure everywhere at the minute with terms of weather, so I wasn't about to go out looking for that, so I thought I'll leave it for now and add plants, because plants can change everything. So it's like 90% of the scape sort of done, like the main part of it, and everything else will just sort of be accent details and things that'll be added after it's being planted. It's typically triangular composition, I guess, which is like everything I do. But next up is the plant. So as I mentioned, this is an African themed biotope or inspired biotope. So we're not going to be using many plants. In fact, there's about 3 varieties altogether, but the first is some Anubias, which I think is found in Africa. I'm sure somebody's going to tell me that I've used a plant that isn't, and if that's the case, I'm sorry, but yeah, we're going to go in with some Anubias, and I'm just going to put these sort of around the base of the structure. I don't want to go too overboard with planting on this. I really was debating keeping this completely hardscape only and just adding wood, rock and botanicals. But as somebody who loves planted tanks, that's sometimes quite hard to stick by. So yeah, we're going to go as minimal plants as possible. So at this point I put in 3 clumps of Anubias, or 3 or 4. However, I did add a little bit more after this, so when you see it next there will be a few more clumps added just into the foreground, just because things were looking a little bit unbalanced at this point. But I had to wait for plants to come at this point. I'd ordered some, so 2 days later the plants arrived, and these are Balasinaria nana. I think these are found sort of worldwide, but they are also found in Africa, I hope. And I picked the Nana variety. I don't know how small they actually stay, but as this is a 30cm cube, I just thought these would give a better sort of size to it. I also added this Nympheolotus. Also at this point I'd filled it up with water because I just needed to get the fish in. But yeah, the Nympheolotus was from the old 90p, not the old 90p, the most recent 90p. I really wanted a lotus in it, but as it turned out the leaves were just too big and they were blocking a lot of light of the stems. So yeah, once it was planted it was time to boil some botanicals. So yeah, I just put some botanicals, I ordered these just online off eBay, put them in a Pyrex jug, added some boiling water, covered them with cling film, and then left them all day for them to sink and sort of release the tannins. Now, I didn't add the tannins from this jug or this like batch of botanicals straight away because the fish were in there, and you kind of have to do it over time. You can't just add all the like botanical juice in, shall we say, because it drastically drops the pH. So I was just adding little bits in at a time, so as not to shock the fish. But then I was also doing water changes, and by that point they'd kind of just diluted out. So at this point it doesn't look like a black water at all. So yeah, it looks more like a bit of a murky aquascape. But as you can see, the botanicals were added, and I also added this thick branch in the front, which definitely just ties the shape in together. And I also added some smaller branches. This one looks a little bit odd. I'm not sure if I like the position or again if it's just because it's not the right colour. But I just think adding more of this stuff, twigs and botanicals and branches and what in the foreground just gave it a more natural kind of look. I think they need to look messy in a way, if that makes sense, rather than like overly scaped. Aquascapes, as natural as we say they are a completely sort of manufactured nature. So yeah, it's kind of hard to kind of get your head around making something look like purposefully natural, if that even makes sense. Maybe I'm just gibbering on. So anyway, after sitting there and looking at it, I actually really liked it, but it needs more botanicals. So I ordered some more botanicals. and set them to boil. Little chicken also agrees that it needs more botanicals, don't you? Chicken's getting really good at jumping now, it's all he does. He's also won this month. Anyway, so we boiled up more botanicals and then it was time to add the fish. Now, if anybody's eagle-eyed, you might have spotted the fish in there already, but the fish that we're going to be putting in today are some gardneri, I don't really know how you pronounce it, killifish. I think they're sometimes called blue lyre-tail killifish. Now, these killies I have had for about 3 years. They're all tank bred. When I first kind of got into the hobby, I got 3 killifish and they just bred like crazy for me. So these are all just like offspring of those, including this male. Now this male's been living in a separate tank. I put the 3 females in first, let them get established, and then put him in because they can be quite feisty little fish and they are prone to fighting, especially if there's like more males than females and things like that. Now if you see on him, we'll get some close-up shortly, but he has got like a bit of a dodgy eye. That's not from him fighting with killifish, that's from him fighting with a rosy-tipped tetra in the big tank. He was in the 90p for a little bit, but now he's back here. He has lived with these females before, so he's back with his wives. I don't know if they're happy to see him or not, but yeah, we'll let them get settled in. I acclimated him by adding the water from the tank because, as I mentioned, the pH is going to be drastically different, so he just kind of drip acclimated, or I just kept adding a little cup of water for 20 minutes just to kind of get him used to it. But yeah, that is pretty much it. So the only other thing to mention would be that this is actually going to be running as a filterless tank. The Vallisneria and the Lotus will be massive sort of feeders on the nutrients and things like that in the tank, so it is going to get water changed every day if it needs it, but eventually these 2 plants can be quite brutes in the aquarium, so it will be running filterless. But yeah, let me know what you think of this one. It's quite different, but I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments and I will see you on the next one. Take care.